Welcome to the fourth video for Chapter 4. Today we're going to explore gram-positive bacteria. Remember that gram-positive bacteria have a thick peptidoglycan cell wall that retains crystal violet stain during the gram stain process, so they're going to appear purple after you gram stain them under the microscope. These gram-positive bacteria are divided into two groups based on their G and C content, G and C meaning guanine and cytosine in their DNA. So high G and C bacteria will have more than 50% guanine and cytosine in their DNA, and low G and C will have less than 50% guanine and cytosine. So classification is based on G and C content, and what that means is you have more guanine and cytosine bonds within the DNA double helix. Remember, G's and C's form 3 hydrogen bonds when they pair together, as opposed to the 2 of A and T, and that makes the G and C content, if you have more of them, the DNA will be more stable. Classification is also based on 16S ribosomal RNA, and that is from the small subunit of the prokaryotic ribosome. So high G and C bacteria will include the class Actinobacteria. For low G and C, we have the class Clostridia, the order Lactobacillus, the class Bacilli, and the genus Mycoplasma. We'll start with Actinobacteria, which are a really diverse group. They range from filamentous forms to small coccobacilli. And most live in the soil or in some kind of aquatic environment, and they're also aerobic. A distinctive feature is that they have several different types of peptidoglycan in their cell wall. And these different species within the group Actinobacteria include pathogens, soil decomposers, and major antibiotic producers. Actinobacteria, a specific species, is also responsible for the earthy smell after it rains, and that phenomenon is called petrichor. So it turns out that these bacteria release a compound known as geosmin, and that is going to be released into the air when it rains, creating these aerosols that we smell, that we inhale, and the resulting smell is that kind of earthy aroma associated with rain. We have several important examples of actinobacteria here. Actinomyces is actually the type that produces that smell after the rain. We have our species Actinomyces israelii that can cause endocarditis and oral disease. For endocarditis, that's the inflammation of the inner lining of the heart. Mycobacterium, remember that genus, is going to be include bacteria that have that waxy wall made of mycolic acid. So these are acid-fast bacteria. And Mycobacterium includes Mycobacterium tuberculosis, as well as Mycobacterium leprae, which causes leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease. And this is an infectious disease that mainly infects the skin, the nerves, the eyes, and also potentially the nose. Corynebacterium usually has a palisade arrangement. It looks like they're stacked like this at angles, and include Corynebacterium diphtheriae, which causes diphtheria, and these bacteria produce diphtheria toxin. Diphtheria is a contagious infection of the respiratory system. Bifidobacterium is a common bacterium in our GI tract and also in the vagina. And these bacteria are also found in foods like yogurt because they are probiotics. Finally, we have Gardnerella vaginalis, which is a gram-variable bacterium. That means they don't stain well with a gram stain. They can sometimes appear purple, sometimes pink, and they are commonly found in issues of bacterial vaginosis. And this is a vaginal infection caused by an imbalance in the vaginal bacteria. We can see Actinomyces israelii on the left that causes endocarditis. The bacterium that causes diphtheria is here in the middle, and I can see some of those palisade arrangements kind of here and here, where they have at least 2 bacteria or more connected at these angles. This one looks like just 2 cells. This one also looks like 2 cells. And on the right, this is the resulting gram stain of a pap smear sample from a woman with vaginosis, and we can see, or we're supposed to be able to see, Gardnerella vaginalis here, although I primarily see epithelial cells from the human. So I can see those have a clear nucleus, so they can't be prokaryotes. The prokaryotes must be on the edges, these tiny structures. It's hard to see. The reason these are gram variable is because these bacteria actually have a really thin gram-positive cell wall. Remember, they're in this group of actinobacteria because they have high GNC content and they have a similar 16S ribosomal RNA molecule or sequence. But here, these bacteria have a thin wall, so they appear either purple or pink sometimes after gram staining. And these bacteria also can lose their cell wall, can lose their peptidoglycan over time. And I wanted to provide additional examples of some of these bacteria. Tuberculosis, I don't have a picture of, but it's estimated that maybe 1/3 of the whole world's population has been infected with tuberculosis, and there are still millions of new infections every year. Treatment of tuberculosis is pretty challenging. People usually have to take a combination of drugs, and it's worse because there are even multi-drug resistant strains of this pathogen. Another one, Microbacterium leprae, that causes Hansen's disease or leprosy I mentioned earlier. This is a chronic disease that impacts the peripheral nerves and the integrity of the skin as well as the mucosal surface of our respiratory tracts. This can lead to a loss of pain sensation. So if you get like a cut or a wound, you might not feel it, and that can lead to secondary injuries and infections. And we have an example of a resulting impact of leprosy up here. On the bottom over here, we have a picture of this bacterium that can be used as a probiotic, bifidobacterium. If you have yogurt or other similar foods at home or drinks at home, you might look in the container and see bifidobacterium listed as one of the contents. For the important genera of actinobacteria, I'd like you to know the ones that I've bolded on the left, including Actinomyces, Bifidobacterium, Carinibacterium, Gardnerella, and then more on the next slide. We also talked about Mycobacterium, these acid-fast bacteria. We didn't talk about Micrococcus yet, but these will be important in the lab. They are found everywhere, ubiquitous in the environment and on the skin, so we'll see them perhaps when we do our skin lab. And Streptomyces, these are important because many of these produce very important antibiotics for us. For our actinobacteria checkpoint, remember they are high GNC gram-positive bacteria. That means their DNA has greater than 50% guanine and cytosine content. Many of these also form filamentous soil-dwelling structures, and some of them, like Streptomyces, are important producers of antibiotics. Now we're going to switch to low GNC bacteria, including the class, or of the class, Clostridia. So these are strict or obligate anaerobes, and they also form endospores. So all of these down here are endospore formers. These are rod-shaped bacteria that are usually found in habitats like the soil or perhaps aquatic sediments where there's a lot of good organic material, nutrients for them. Unfortunately, they can survive harsh conditions because of their potential endospores. So some important examples include Clostridium perfringens, which can cause food poisoning. So it's the third most common cause of food poisoning in the US, and it can also cause gas gangrene, which occurs when the endospores of Clostridium perfringens enters one of our wounds and germinates, becoming these vegetative or viable cells that produce a toxin that can cause tissue death or necrosis. We also have another example here, Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus, and it produces a tetanus neurotoxin that prevents the antagonistic muscle from relaxing when you're contracting the agonist muscle. And this leads to spastic paralysis, so basically uncontrolled muscle contraction. Almost like the opposite of tetanus, we have this bacterium, Clostridium botulinum, that releases a botulism toxin. What happens here in this case is that the botulism toxin blocks the release of acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction, so you can't contract your muscles, and this leads to flaccid paralysis. Botulism toxin is also known as Botox, and it can be used in a cosmetic procedure to get rid of wrinkles or prevent wrinkles. Finally, we have Clostridioides difficile, or C. diff. So this is a really common source of hospital-acquired infections or nosocomial infections. And this can happen when a person is immunosuppressed or perhaps taking antibiotics. When you take antibiotics, you alter and kill off most of the good bacteria in your GI tract. But because Clostridioides can produce endospores, they can survive and overgrow and start releasing toxins that cause diarrhea and inflammation of the large intestine. I wanted to give you more background information on tetanus and botulism. So let's look at botulism first. This is up here, and in normal contraction, what we have is a neuron releasing molecules known as acetylcholine. This is a type of neurotransmitter onto the muscle cell, and that induces contraction. Botulism toxin actually blocks the presynaptic neuron, so it actually is indicated using this dark red line here. And you can see it prevents acetylcholine from being released and bound to the muscle cell. There's no signal being released or no signal being sent to the muscle cell, so there is no contraction. And that leads to flaccid paralysis. Down here is what we see for tetanus. So in normal muscle contraction, the agonist muscle is contracting and the antagonist has to relax. For example, if I'm contracting my biceps muscle, my triceps should be relaxed. So this is showing you in my example, the triceps, so the antagonistic muscle. It is not contracting because there is a neuron before the presynaptic neuron that's inhibiting the presynaptic neuron. So this inhibitory neuron is releasing inhibitory molecules like glycine or GABA that prevent acetylcholine from being released. So this antagonistic muscle is relaxed. But if tetanus toxin is present, you can see it binds to that inhibitory neuron, preventing the release of GABA or glycine, and that means acetylcholine is being released onto the antagonistic muscle. So in tetanus, you have the agonist and the antagonist contracting at the same time. So up here at the top, we have an image of a child with tetanus, and vaccination rates have dramatically reduced the number of cases of tetanus, but unfortunately thousands or even tens of thousands of children worldwide still get tetanus every year. This usually happens in countries with low vaccination rates, so that's where we see the majority of cases occurring in children. Down in the picture over here, we see a picture of honey, and you might have heard that infants under 1 year of age should not eat honey. The reason for this is because Clostridium botulinum endospores can be present in honey, and when they're ingested by infants that are young, under 1 year old, these endospores can germinate, and germination results in that production of the toxin, of the botulism toxin. Babies are susceptible because they don't have a mature digestive system yet. They don't have all of the other microbiota or normal flora in their gut that adults have. That allows the Clostridium botulinum endospores to survive and germinate, and that does not happen in adults, normal healthy adults with a robust microbiome, because our other microbes will inhibit Clostridium botulinum. And here we have an image of Clostridioides difficile that causes C. diff or severe colitis, inflammation of the large intestine, and diarrhea. So we can see that these are rod-shaped cells, and these are also endospore formers. Our next group of low GNC bacteria are from the order Lactobacillus, and these are gram-positive bacteria that include these genera, including Lactobacillus, which are a rod-shaped bacteria, Leucoconostoc, Enterococcus, and Streptococci, or Streptococcus the genus. These three are either going to be spherical in shape or sometimes ovoid, which means egg-shaped. So Lactobacillus is a bacterium or a group of bacteria that ferment sugars into lactic acid, and they're commonly used as probiotics. So they're found in foods, fermented foods like pickles or yogurt. And they can also be found in the normal vagina. So they make up part of that microbiota or microbiome. For Streptococcus, this genus includes many pathogens, many disease-causing bacteria, including Streptococcus pyogenes, which causes strep throat, but can also cause necrotizing fasciitis, which is also sometimes known as flesh-eating disease. Streptococcus pneumoniae is responsible for pneumonia, but can also cause bacterial meningitis. And Streptococcus mutans is responsible, or can be responsible, for dental caries, which is the process of tooth decay and leads to cavities, or the holes in teeth. Finally, we have Enterococcus here. These are normal bacteria found in our GI tract, but can also cause urinary tract infections and hospital infections. What I didn't talk about here is Leuconostoc. These are bacteria that can also produce lactic acid through fermentation, and they are also found in fermented foods like sauerkraut or other dairy products, similar to lactobacillus. Here we have Streptococcus gram-stained under a microscope on the left. I can see the arrangement is chains, so I can see the strepto arrangement, and the shape are spheres or cocci, but sometimes they appear kind of ovoid or egg-shaped. On the right, this is not a slide, but this is a picture of a petri dish. So we're not looking at individual cells, but instead colonies. And this contains blood agar. So one way to identify the presence of Streptococcus pyogenes is if they break down red blood cells in blood agar. And we'll be doing this test in the lab about halfway through the semester. Our next group of low GNC bacteria is the class Bacilli. And we've seen this word used in many different ways. One, to describe the shape of bacteria. Two, as a genus name. Now we're using it as a class. And this class actually includes both rod and spherical shaped bacteria. So don't think that it's only rods. So of important bacillus, if I look at the genus Bacillus, all of these species within the genus Bacillus are endospore formers. So they can make endospores, they can survive harsh environments, and they're either aerobic or facultative anaerobes typically. Clinically relevant examples include Bacillus anthracis. Bacillus anthracis causes anthrax, and this can infect or affect both animals and humans. In humans, you'll see it results in charcoal black ulcers on the skin. It can lead to severe enterocolitis, pneumonia, and perhaps even brain damage if there's a lot of swelling. So anthrax, if it's not treated, can be lethal, can be deadly. Bacillus cereus is closely related, but usually not lethal. This is a bacterium that causes food poisoning. So if you leave food out, one of the most common examples is in rice. If you leave it at room temperature, the endospores can germinate and produce toxins that lead to food poisoning. For Bacillus thuringiensis, this is a bacterium that produces a toxin known as Bt toxin. And this toxin is harmful to insects, but not to humans. So a lot of crops have been genetically modified so that the plants produce Bt toxin, which kills insects, but is safe for human consumption. So one of the most common examples of GMO foods is Bt corn. Bt corn contains genes from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis, allowing it to produce that Bt toxin. So on the right, we have GMO corn, genetically modified corn. This is Bt corn, so insects can't eat it or they'll die. And this is regular, non-modified corn. And this picture actually is pretty old. It comes from 1997 when they were starting these trials. And here we see Bacillus cereus. On the left, it's a gram stain under the microscope. I can see these are rod-shaped cells that are arranged in chains. And of course, they're gram-positive, as I can see with the purplish blue color, that dark color. On the right, this is not a slide, but instead colonies growing on a petri dish. In this case, again, we're looking at blood agar. And so each colony is made of millions and millions of these bacteria. So now they're visible to the naked eye. And I can see they're kind of a milky white color, and they have irregular shapes. The genus Staphylococcus is also within the class Bacilli, and these are spherical cells arranged in clusters that are usually facultative anaerobes. This includes Staphylococcus epidermidis that lives on our skin. These are usually non-pathogenic but can cause issues with patients who are immunodeficient. So it can cause skin wound infections. We also have S. aureus here, which is able to actually cause many different types of infections, including skin infections. Some strains of S. aureus produce enterotoxin, which leads to Staphylococcus food poisoning. So this is going to be inflammation of the GI tract. We can also have S. aureus, certain strains that produce a toxin that leads to toxic shock or toxic shock syndrome. Other strains have developed resistance to many of the antibiotics we currently have. So some antibiotic strains are designated as methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and others are in this category vancomycin-resistant S. aureus. And so these strains are some of the most difficult to treat because they are resistant to almost all of the antibiotics we currently have, not just methicillin and vancomycin. So staphylococcal toxic shock syndrome is caused by TSS toxin, and this toxin can grow in wounds or in the vagina. If it gets absorbed into the blood, it'll cause fever, vomiting, red rash, extremely low blood pressure, which is known as shock, and can cause even massive loss of sheets of skin. So you'll see large sheets of skin sloughing off and a lot of redness and inflammation. This can occur in both males and females, although there was a really interesting clinical example in the 1980s. There is an epidemic among menstruating women because S. aureus grows really well in super absorbent tampons, especially if a female leaves them in for days. So when these super absorbent tampons first came into the market, there were not very many clear instructions. So they were misused, leading to this epidemic. This picture actually comes from the Bowman Microbiology text, a different textbook, but I like how you can see the clear increase or the epidemic of toxic shock syndrome when the tampons, those super absorbent tampons, were distributed in the market, and then the decrease over time when the tampons were withdrawn, and then when proper labeling and instructions were included. Our next group of low GNC gram-positive bacteria are our mycoplasmas. And these are really interesting because they don't have a cell wall. So they're not stained by the gram stain, but they're grouped in this category of low GNC because of their DNA content, because of their sequence, as well as their 16S ribosomal RNA. Because they don't have cell walls, they have variable shapes, right? These are pleomorphic, which means they have a variable shape. So sometimes they can look rod-like, sometimes they look sphere-like. They're also extremely small. So some are even smaller than 0.2 micrometers in diameter, which is smaller than even some of our larger viruses. One important example is Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which causes a very mild form of pneumonia that's sometimes also known as walking pneumonia. This table includes important gram-positive bacteria that are in that low GC category, and I'd like you to know the bolded ones. Don't worry about leukonostoc or ureaplasma. My last checkpoint for the first question, name some ways streptococci are classified. So we didn't really jump into detail yet. We're going to learn more about this later, but one way to classify streptococci is through their ability to break down red blood cells and blood agar. So I showed you a picture of Streptococcus pyogenes on a blood agar plate, and they can actually completely break down red blood cells, known as complete hemolysis or beta hemolysis. We'll learn more about that later. We're also going to learn later that streptococci can be classified based on the types of antigens they have in their cell wall, and this is going to be called or known as Lancefield classification. For the second one, name one pathogenic low GNC gram-positive bacterium and a disease it causes. So Streptococcus pyogenes falls under that category. This causes strep throat and also necrotizing fasciitis. We can also list Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus, Bacillus anthracis, which causes anthrax, Staphylococcus aureus, which causes those skin infections, and also includes MRSA or VRSA. All right, let's recap 4.4. So we have our unique features. High GNC gram-positive actinobacteria have more than 50% guanine and cytosine in their DNA. They had a wide range of shapes like filaments, rods, coccoid, or irregular forms. Many of them live in the soil, others live in aquatic environments, and they were mostly aerobic. Some of them could even produce a lot of helpful antibiotics for us, like streptomyces, and some of them had mycolic acid in their wall, like Mycobacterium. For the low GC gram-positive bacteria, they have less than 50% GNC, or guanine and cytosine, in their DNA, and they had diverse groups. We had Clostridia, which were endospore formers, Lactobacillus, which were lactic acid producers, Bacilli, which were also endospore formers, Mycoplasmas that do not have cell walls and they're pleomorphic. They have these abnormal various shapes. Similarities and differences between high and low GC. In terms of similarities, both stain purple with a gram stain. They have thick peptidoglycan walls, usually. Both of them have medically important pathogen, and some are, from both groups, are also beneficial. And both can form commensal relationships with us. They live in our GI tract, they live in our skin. Some differences include, of course, their GNC content, high versus low. For high GC, they're usually filamentous and found in the soil and make antibiotics for us. For low GC, we saw lots of endospore formers. And then some low GNC, or like Mycoplasma, didn't have cell walls at all. For examples, so I already mentioned some examples, but high GNC included things like, or bacteria like Mycobacterium tuberculosis that causes tuberculosis, and streptomyces that are soil bacteria that make a lot of important antibiotics for us. For low GNC, we had Clostridium botulinum that causes botulism, right, by producing that botulism toxin. We had Streptococcus pyogenes that causes strep throat, Bacillus anthracis that causes anthrax, and even Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which can cause atypical or walking pneumonia. And that takes us to the end of our fourth video. In our last video, we'll talk about deeply branching bacteria and archaea.